Thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure to join you today.
I just finished reading your book, and it felt like there's hell in earth.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. What's happening right now in the mining provinces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo is hell on earth. It's impossible to imagine that these types of conditions exist, and not only exist in this modern era, but are linked to our lives. All of us, every one of us, you, me, people we know, none of us can function for 24 hours without the cobalt that's being mined in this hell in the Congo.
Can you help people understand why Congo is such an integral part of our daily lives?
Yeah, sure. So cobalt is an essential component to most of the lithium ion rechargeable batteries made today. So that means most of the batteries in smartphones, tablets, laptops, other rechargeable devices, and increasingly and crucially in electric vehicles. Cobalt is used in those batteries because it allows the battery to hold maximum energy density while remaining thermally stable. What does that mean? That means it can hold the most charge and not catch on fire. So you don't have to plug in your phone as often. You don't have to plug in your laptop as often. Your electric vehicle will drive farther before you have to plug it in again. That's what makes cobalt so essential to our gadget driven lifestyle and this transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles.
And so, what inspired you to get into researching on what's going on in Congo and even taking a trip down there?
Well, I've taken many trips, but the starting point was I had been doing research on slavery and child labor in dozens of countries around the world since the year 2000, looking at various facets of modern day slavery and child labor at the bottom of the global economy. And it was around 2016, some colleagues from Africa um, said, "So start, there's something terrible happening in cobalt mining in the Congo, and it's in the batteries. You should go take a look." And I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought cobalt was a color that was on Chinese vases. I didn't know anything about mining and batteries. But I thought, okay, these are people I trust. I should go and take a look to see what's happening. It took me a little time to develop some relationships on the ground, trusted relationships, and to organize that first trip, which I took in the summer of 2018. And I had seen a lot of horrible faces of modern day slavery at that point. I mean, in dozens of countries. But what I saw taking place in the mining provinces of the Congo, the severity of human and environmental destruction taking place to feed cobalt up the chain as quickly as possible into our batteries. That left me candidly quite shell shocked. And I thought this is so urgent, so severe, and so inextricably linked to our lives, and people have no idea. I had no idea. And that was the starting point of going back again and again to try and uncover the deepest truth of what's happening, understand why it's happening, and document the voices of people in the Congo speaking their truth to try to bring their voices out into this world that can't function without their suffering.
And Congo has played such a role, such a massive role in terms of providing the resources that have been needed for, well, really most of the world's development.
Going back generations, yes, Congo is this region, this heart of Africa, is both blessed and cursed with enormous resource riches. Uh, the blessing, of course, is to have these riches in that part of Africa, but the curse is these treasures have attracted pirates and imperialists and treasure seekers and colonialists and foreign powers to pillage these resources that are needed for various economic and industrial developments at the time. So this goes all the way back to, the rubber and ivory from Leopold's days, and then just as Congo Free State was transitioning from Leopold's clutches to the Belgian state, they had just prospected the minerals in Katanga. That's the southeastern part of the Congo for people who may not be familiar. And it was swimming in valuable metals and minerals. The Belgian geologist Jules Cornet, who first prospected those minerals, called it a geological scandal. That how can there be so much in the dirt in one place? Copper, nickel, zinc, lithium, cobalt, gold, and so that became the new focus. And first it was copper for industrial development, and then you can just trace the economic progress of the global north and the needs to support that development. And Congo just had everything, or almost everything that was needed, and it was just one wave of pillage after another, so that the people of the Congo never benefited from the resources of their own country. It was all siphoned out into foreign hands from Leopold onward.
Will there, how long would it take until there comes a time where the people of Congo are able to benefit from the resources? Because if you trace all the way from Leopold to today, I mean, the people of Congo keep on suffering the more resources are discovered in their region.
Yeah, it's a multi-generational curse, and a child born in the Congo today inherits this multi-generational trauma and curse and pillage. The degree of poverty and strife and violence that's taking place in the Congo today is a direct result of all of this foreign meddling and pillage. And there was a chance at independence with Patrice Lumumba that maybe the resources of Congo could benefit Congolese people. That was one of his very bold visions. It was an anti-colonial vision to say, listen, you people in the global north, Belgians in particular, have pillaged us, enslaved us, ransacked us, and left us in this catastrophe. But we have the riches. What does Belgium have? They have cold weather, and that's it. Congo has the riches. So he said, these riches should benefit our people. Now, no sooner had those words come out of his mouth than already the Belgians and the global north were plotting, wait, we have to get rid of this guy. He's going to be a problem. We need someone who will continue this colonial relationship of siphoning the riches out of the country towards us. And that's exactly what happened. Within months, he was assassinated and replaced with a bloody, corrupt dictator, Joseph Mobutu, who did that. He lined his own pockets, of course, but kept all the riches flowing towards the Western European and North American powers, and so Congo, the people of Congo, only suffered.
And something that I failed to understand was the fact that Msiri was trying to protect Congo's resources. And then a few years later, his grandson assassinates Patrice Lumumba.
You can't make these things up. If you were to write this in a movie script, someone would say, no, that just seems too improbable, too ridiculous. And so again, I didn't know this history. I mean, who studies this kind of history? But it's important to understand it, and history is filled with painful irony. It was Msiri who first tried to keep the Belgians out of Katanga. Now he wasn't exactly a paragon of good leadership either, but he had these enormous copper reserves in Katanga. He had his kingdom. He was trying to keep Europeans out of that part of Congo. Leopold's mercenaries eventually chopped his head off and took control of Katanga, and then went straight into mining mode. It was mostly about copper at that time. This is back in the early 1900s. So it was mostly about copper at that time. And so much of the copper bullets fired in World War I, the copper came from Katanga. So now you skip ahead a few generations. Congo has achieved its freedom through a bitter fight, a brave fight. Lumumba articulates this bold anti-colonial vision, and the Belgians want to get rid of him. And it was Msiri's grandson who was one of the assassins to help get Katanga and Congo back to the Belgians. So who knows if he even understood his, his
Mm.
ancestors, what role he played. But yes, you can't make these things up, and it was a very tragic irony.
I read the book and I felt like I was staring into the abyss. And I can't imagine how it must have been for you being on the ground and, witnessing the atrocities that were happening to the people of Congo and the suffering that they were going through, and even hearing the stories of individuals who are actually going through such struggles.
Well, that's the important thing. Uh, the point of Cobalt Red, the point of my repeated trips there was to try and bring the voices of the Congo's people out into the world, because they've been screaming, as you said, the right word, abyss. They've been screaming into an abyss for generations. And insofar as the cobalt scramble is concerned, they've been screaming for the better part of 15, 16 years into an abyss. No one sees them, no one hears them. Their pain cannot pierce this thick, heavy veil of obscurity that's uh, uh, thrust upon them. And that's why it's important for journalists, truth seekers, to get into the Congo, just as they did during Leopold's time. Everything, especially back then, you could orchestrate a genocide, and it was very difficult for the outside world to find out about it. There were no, there's no WhatsApp and mobile phones and videos and YouTube and all of that. You couldn't just hop on a plane and go to Congo and hop back. In those days, it took months just to get there. But truth seekers were on the ground. They found out about the horror, and little by little, uh, the voices of the Congolese people and the truth on the ground came out into the world, and it activated moral leaders who tried to set the injustice right. And that's the purpose of, I hope, what I tried to achieve in Cobalt Red, and what others are doing in trying to go to Congo to get the voices of those people who are suffering, to say, listen, when a tech company tells you their supply chain is audited, when a EV company tells you that their cobalt is clean, here's the truth from the ground. Now, you decide who you want to listen to, the marketing teams of multi-billionaires or the grindingly poor people in the Congo where the cobalt is coming from. And I think we're all smart enough and we're all wise enough to know where the truth really is. And so when a CEO says, no, no, don't worry, uh, there's no child labor in my supply chain, everything is audited. And in fact, I'm helping those people. Please look the other way and upgrade your phone. And then the person in the Congo says, well, my child was buried alive today or suffered a shattered spine, uh, 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 or our entire countryside has been ripped apart and contaminated, and villages have been bulldozed and razed to the ground by mining companies. You think, now who's telling the truth? And of course, the people of the Congo are the ones telling the truth. And so that's why the book and other journalists are wise to focus on those voices so that people can hear that truth, and then it will activate today's champions to try and bring to set this injustice right.
When you speak of, how the blood of Congo powers our lives, people might really underestimate what it is that you're talking about. So can you please try and paint us a picture of what that really means?
Yeah, it should be taken literally and in the most extreme way imaginable. It's not, a play on words. um, when you go to the cobalt mining provinces of the Congo, and if you want to go to, Google Earth and look up two towns, Lubumbashi and Kolwezi, and they're a few hundred kilometers from each other. The the little part of Congo between those two cities, there's more cobalt under the ground there than the rest of the world combined. Imagine if half the world's oil was in one little place, a few hundred kilometers long. Imagine what would happen to that place. The violence, the foreign interventions and influence, the corruption, the destruction to get that oil out of the ground, because that's the only place it was. Same is happening for coal. Well, that's what's happening for coal. And when you go there, you see the consequences of a scramble without moral boundary, without consideration for the dignity of the people living there, without consideration for the protection of their environment. The entire landscape has been obliterated. Millions of trees have been chopped to the ground. Lakes, rivers have all been contaminated with toxic substances from mining companies. The air is a brown haze. It's hard to look. You feel it in your throat. You can see some of these mining pits from outer space. They're so big. Giant cavernous pits in the ground, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 square kilometers in size. Just this scramble to rip cobalt out of the ground to meet the demand at the top of the chain by tech companies and car companies. Now, there are millions of people who are living there, and they've been pushed to the edge of existence. Already, they were grindingly poor, lacked stability, security, opportunity. And now you displace them, push them to the edge, and there's no other way to survive other than to try and scrounge at the ground to fill a sack of cobalt for the day and maybe get the equivalent of $1 or $2, €1 or $2. After 12 hours of hazardous, toxic grinding labor, cobalt is toxic to touch and breathe. Children are covered in it all day. Young mothers with babies on their back are breathing this toxic dust all day. They use little shovels, strips of rebar, or their bare hands to get cobalt out of the ground. And it all flows into the formal economy inside Congo. These hundreds of thousands of people, including tens of thousands of children, who are scrounging at the ground in subhuman conditions for $1 in income. All their production, which accounts and amounts to hundreds of thousands of tons in the year, is sold directly to foreign mining companies and then mixed in with their production and then exported out of the country. So there's no way to disaggregate. By the time the cobalt is at the border in Kipushi or Kasumbalesa, there's no, okay, the bottom half of that sack of cobalt came from an excavator and the top half came from a child. So please track it accordingly. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's all mixed together. It all flows into the formal supply chain, and it is all starting on the ground in these apocalypse conditions.
With the atrocities that you witnessed, I don't think you came out as the same person who went in. Right. And so how was that experience like for you? And how did that, shape your view of, how far humans can go?
It's an interesting question, and it has two very antithetical answers, two very opposing experiences that come out of spending time on the ground in the Congo. The first is humanity is doomed. We are a violent, greedy, awful, miserable species that doesn't deserve this planet and life. Look what we do to each other. At this stage in our arc, after centuries of blood has been spilled to advance human rights, after millennia has been spent trying to improve, and yet we are still treating each other like beasts with violence and disregard. So it's very hard to have faith in humanity when you see how awful we can be to each other, when there's a treasure involved. If there's no treasure involved, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But when there's a treasure involved and money at stake and wealth to be generated, then all morality is jettisoned. But on the complete other end of the emotional spectrum, you spend time in the Congo, witnessing these same horrific conditions. It can be enormously inspiring, almost exalting, because you also bear witness to the grit and strength of humanity. The people in the Congo who wake up every day facing oblivion, violence, destruction, inhumanity, disregard for their humanity and dignity, And yet they persevere without anger, without bitterness. They look after their families. They work hard to survive. They they survive conditions that would make you and me and everyone we know fall into a corner and disintegrate into dust. And they get through it all each day. And then I think, my God, look at the strength that people have. Look at the dignity and grace humanity is capable of, that despite being treated so miserably, they still have a smile on their face and carry through with faith and strength and familial bonds and discipline and responsibility without anger and bitterness. There's no sense of vengeance, no sense of um, fatalism. There's a will to survive and improve, and I think so. It's both sides of it, you know. And so when I'm there, I focus on those exalted aspects of humanity that are manifest not in the tech CEOs and the mining company CEOs, but in the people at the bottom of the chain who survive and persevere through all these miserable conditions with so much nobility and grace. And so, of course, that's inspiring. And I think at the end of the day, this is what will triumph on this planet. That those aspects of humanity are the ones that will triumph, not the greed and the avarice, the indignity and the violence.
One of the people you interviewed said that we are working in our graves. And if such a person thinks that way every single time they go to their office, where do you think they draw the strength and courage to wake up every single morning and, keep doing what they're doing despite all the suffering and the pain that they're going through? I mean, because some of them are injured, but they still have to go and work. I mean, unless otherwise, they won't be able to feed their families.
That's it. You see, that last bit was the part. People persevere. They work in their graves to feed their children, to feed their families, to clothe their children, and maybe if they're lucky, send a child to school so their lives can be better. Uh, it's it's very hard sometimes to describe, and even now after many trips to Congo, it's a difficult thing for me to try and articulate. But you, it's there's this sense, you get this feeling outside of Congo that whether it's because they're poor or never had an education or whatever, somehow their degree of humanity, their familial bonds, their love for their spouse and children is less than ours. I don't know how to put my word, I've still struggled to put my words around this feeling. But there's this notion that, well, they don't care about their children as much as I care about mine. They don't care about their families as much as we care about ours. For whatever reason, maybe it's because they're Africans, maybe it's because they're illiterate, maybe it's because they're poor, maybe it's because of whatever other stupid reason people come up with. But when you get on the ground, you see enormous and intense familial strength, love, kinship, community strength. And so people persevere. They work in their graves. They suffer insult and injury to take care of their families from a sense of love and duty. And the truth is, their degree of kinship and bond and love transcends what we have in the West because it comes so easy to us. And life comes so easy to us. I mean, most people go to their office, they get their coffee in the morning, they work, have a good paycheck, good conditions, they come home, they hug their children, they hug their husbands and wives and so on, and life goes on. And to manifest love and intensity and duty and responsibility in the face of enormous peril is something greater, I think, to continue persevering. And I think so. I think the world has it completely the other way around when it comes to Africa and the global South, or people who are in poor, violent, degrading conditions. As I said, I've struggled to try and wrap my head around this, but it's a feeling that's there. It's a feeling that's there when you're outside of Congo and you hear people talking about Africa or poor South Asians or whatever. that they're at some notch lower on the humanity intensity scale, when in fact I think it's the other way around.
And I think most of the times, it's very easy to have perception, of the Congolese people, right? And saying, why are they poor, or why don't they work hard, or why do they have so many kids yet they're still so poor? But then when someone reads your book, I mean, that perception changes completely.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if so, uh, Congolese people are the people in Congo today face poverty, violence, and strife as a direct consequence of what was done to them by all of us meaning the global north. Okay, they were doing just fine in the heart of Africa, in Congo Kingdom. I mean, it wasn't a perfect place, but they were doing just fine before the Portuguese showed up. And from that day forward, everything got worse, generation after generation. First, the slave trade for 3.5 centuries, then colonization for a century. And then you get to all the strife of the post colonial period. And so the conditions people face in Congo and other African countries and other post-colonial countries are a direct consequence of what was done to them. So I think it's too easy to say, well, look at Congolese people. There's corruption, there's violence, there's poverty. Why are they having so many children when they're poor? People are just trying to survive from one day to the next. And it's hard to have that mindset, outside to think, what is life like when you're just your horizon is 24 hours. You're looking only one day ahead. I have to get food today. I can't worry about tomorrow, the next day. I don't have my savings account. I'm not worried about retirement. I'm not putting money into a college fund. I mean, it's a completely different kind of existence, and it's a direct consequence of centuries of this foreign pillage and influence.
Was there a time that, it became too much for you to take in and to bear the fact that, you're seeing all this suffering from the Congolese people? And I'm sure, when you're speaking to them, sharing their stories, obviously some of them would ask if there's any way that you can help them. I mean, and how was that like for you?
Well, every time I went to the Congo, it was overwhelming. Um, to have a mother sit just across the table from me and tell me and relive the day she found out her child had been buried alive in a tunnel collapse, digging for cobalt, uh, and to witness her reliving that pain and torment. Um, and then the next mother, and then the next father, and the next wife, or to sit down with a group of children who have broken legs, shattered spines, who never went to a day of school, whose only existence is kilograms of cobalt until they're dead. It's devastating, but they're the ones suffering. So there's no space for me to think, it's really hard hearing this. I mean, it's hard living it. It's hard suffering it. The least I can do is listen as long as it takes, as often as required, um, and bring the voices of that suffering out into the world. So I won't say it's not devastating. Of course it is. It's immensely painful. I mean, anyone with an ounce of empathy would feel shattered. And then you multiply that times many, many, many such encounters. And you see, and people don't even have to say a word, and you can see on their faces an enormity of suffering that is beyond anything I can imagine. But they're the ones suffering. So anytime I started to falter or think, this is getting to be too much, it's taking a heavy toll, I just slap myself and say, what are you talking about? You're not suffering it. At the end of this trip, you'll get on a plane, you'll go home, and be just fine. So sit down, focus, listen, document, empathize, be patient, and bring these voices out into the world. That's the purpose of each and every trip that I took, as well as observation of their surrounding reality. So I could explain with ground truth why, when a tech company says my supply chain is audited, there's no child labor in it, I can explain accurately why that's a fictional statement. Well, this is why it's a fictional statement, because I went to that mine and this is what I saw inside that mine. So it was that observation of ground conditions as well as the human narrative that was in the focus of my research.
When companies say that they're using clean cobalt, how does that compare to your experience and what you saw on the ground in Congo?
It's a total fiction. There's no such thing as far as Congo is concerned. And remember, Congo supplied about 3/4 of the world's cobalt last year. So that's all of it. And there's a little piece from Australia, there's a little piece from Russia, there's a little piece from Morocco. But if you're a big tech company or a car company, you need Congo cobalt. There's no other supply, no other adequate supply. And there's no such thing as clean cobalt in the Congo. Uh, Put to the side the human rights violence. Every ounce of cobalt coming up out of the Congo is tainted with enormous environmental destruction. Full stop. Just right there already. If you are telling me I'm buying an electric vehicle to save the environment, but the battery is destroying the environment, that's a hypocrisy. Unless you're saying, well, our environment counts, African environment doesn't count. In which case, we're back to a concept. Also a hypocrisy. So just from an environmental standpoint, complete destruction, contamination, toxicity. You can live in that part of the Congo, have nothing to do with mining, and you are slowly being poisoned to death by cobalt mining every day. Now, you add to that the human rights violence. And a tech company will say, I bought my cobalt from ABC Mining Company, and there's no child labor in ABC Mining Company. Well, when you go to the ground and you go to ABC Mining Company and you walk into their big pit, you see there are hundreds of children digging inside of it, along with their parents. So it's a complete fiction because the assumption is, well, who's going to go to Congo and see what the truth is? And even if they do, we've got marketing teams and we'll spin it and no one will believe them. And that was King Leopold's mindset. When stories came out that Force Publique was chopping off people's hands who didn't get enough rubber, Leopold said, no, that's wild boars. Well, wild boars must be doing that. As he thought, now who's going to go all the way to Congo and actually document it? And who's going to listen to Congolese people anyway? I'm a king. It's the same mindset. It's King Tech, King Car Company, telling the same fictional story, pillaging the Congo, and Congo people have the truth, and they're speaking the truth, and now the world is learning about it.
Okay. So when you met the women who were rinsing and you asked them how the water was, and I actually want to quote what they said. So they said that the lake is poisoned. It kills the babies inside us. And mosquitoes do not drink the blood of the people who work here. What does it take for mosquito not to drink one's blood?
It means you're a walking toxic human being. And let me explain how a person becomes, their blood becomes so toxic that even a mosquito will not bite you. So when people are digging for cobalt, a family or a community, and cobalt is everywhere in that part of the Congo. So you can walk around, scrape your hand on the ground, and you'll have some copper and cobalt and nickel and so on. It's all over the place, and that's part of what's driving this fever and scramble. So communities will dig. So take a family or a couple of families. They'll divide the tasks, by age and gender. So digging a pit or a trench will be done by a father and maybe his older sons, teenage boys, because it requires a certain amount of strength with a shovel to dig a 5, 10, 15, 20-meter pit to slowly excavate cobalt. They will fill a sack with dirt and mud and an ore, a stone called heterogenite. Heterogenite has copper, cobalt, and nickel inside it. And that's the stone that artisanal miners are looking for. Local community, people who are digging, they're looking for that stone. So father and his teenage sons, maybe his brother, they'll be digging these pits and they'll fill a sack full of stone and mud and other and heterogenite. That sack, which will then be 40 or 50 kilograms in weight, um, they'll drag over to a rinsing area. Could be a lake, could be a small pond, could be a river, could be just a pool of water. And it's usually mothers and their daughters or younger sons who will then rinse that sack to separate the dirt and mud from the heterogenite. And so they get into the water and they have a sieve and they'll empty out the mud and stone into the sieve and then they'll rinse it up and down in the water. And that water, that pool of water, could be the edge of a lake or a small little rinsing pool, is accumulating all these toxic heavy metals. Heterogenite also at times has traces of radioactive uranium in it. So sack by sack, day by day, week by week, that body of water is accumulating toxic levels of heavy metal. And for children or mothers who are standing up to their waist in that water, they're being exposed through their skin to highly toxic heavy metals, and it accumulates in their bodies. Chromium, lead, uranium, cobalt, all of these things are highly toxic heavy metals, and they have significant long-term health consequences: cancers, birth defects, thyroid disease, neurological disease, on down the list. And they know it. The people, the women, the girls, the children who are rinsing, they know it. So the men and boys who are digging trenches and tunnels know that they could suffer a horrific injury and death. The mothers and daughters who are rinsing in the bodies of water know it's toxic because they feel it in their bodies. It kills the babies. Mosquitoes don't bite them. And there's only one reason for that. That person is a walking biohazard. But there's no choice in the matter. So when we talk about disregard for humanity and indignity and violence at the bottom of supply chains that reach up into companies worth trillions of dollars that we all rely on every day, the bottom of that chain is this immense invasion of the human rights and dignity of Congolese people. And so that's how you get to the point. If you're a mother or a young girl or a teenage girl, that's how you get to the point where you're a walking biohazard because you've accumulated so much toxic heavy metal in your body, rinsing that heterogenite and separating it from the mud and dirt, so you can then fill a sack with just heterogenite stones that you then sell into the formal supply chain. And you go through all of that, and at the end of all that, the family is earning about $1 a day each.
I mean, and if there wasn't a chain of, all these people in between middlemen until, the artisan miners are able to sell what they have produced, they would have earned more than what they currently earn. And so there is still a lot of chain in which money is lost in between. And at the end of the day, the people who are actually in the tunnel, the people who are actually sieving, they're the ones who earn the lowest.
Yeah, so let's walk through the supply chain because everyone is siphoning value out of the hard labor of the Congolese people, and they're left with almost nothing. The top of the chain is, of course, tech and EV companies. That's where the demand starts. Everything that's happening downstream is a consequence, a direct consequence, and it's only happening because of the demand at the top of the chain. Nothing else would exist if it weren't for this massive demand for cobalt by tech companies and EV companies for the batteries in the gadgets and cars. As you go down, and so they siphon most of the value out. You just look at the bank accounts of Apple and Tesla and so on. They siphon most of the value, unquestionably. And you work down the chain, you get to a battery manufacturer, down to a mining company, down into the Congo. And there's this informal ecosystem underneath the formal economy. So the formal economy stops at some Chinese state-run mining company that's ransacking the Congo. And from that Chinese company, there's a few European companies as well, but it's mostly Chinese companies, mining companies. That's where the formal supply chain starts. Beneath that is where these hundreds of thousands of Congolese people are scrounging in conditions we've talked about for $1 a day to feed cobalt into that formal supply chain. So how does it get there? After the family, the community, or whoever it is, has dug the cobalt in the mud and separated and sieved it and filled a sack with heterogenite, how does that heterogenite sack get into the hands of a foreign mining company? And there's this sort of laundering mechanism that takes the child mined cobalt and family mined cobalt into the formal supply chain. These trade négociations and these buying houses, maisons d'achat, or depots. And a family will sell their sack of cobalt to a trader or a buying house for the equivalent of earning maybe $1 or $2 a day. And that trader, most of them are Chinese traders. They're also Congolese, Lebanese, and Indians and Russians. Most of them are Chinese. Most of the buying houses are run by Chinese agents. They buy the cobalt mined by a Congolese family, and they sell it to the foreign mining company. They often are working for the foreign mining company for the sole purpose of buying artisanal cobalt and selling it to. So at the bottom of the chain, that family has no choice but to accept the price that they're given for the sack of cobalt by the trader, by the buyer, and it works out to, never works out to more than $1 or $2 a day for 2 or 3 40-kilogram sacks of heterogenite, which is about how much a family can produce after 12 hours. And that trader will then sell it at a 5 or 10 times markup to the formal mining company. And so that's how they siphon value out of the labor of Congolese people. And from that point forward, it's in the formal supply chain and is refined and put into batteries and so on. And the value is a little bit hard to track until you get to the London Metal Exchange, where you've got spot prices for refined cobalt that work out to $50 a kilogram. And remember, the Congolese family is selling 100 or 120 kilograms of raw cobalt for a few dollars. And now we get to the top of the chain, and it's it's $50 for 1 kilogram. So that's the asymmetry in value. And if even 0.1% of that value at the top of the chain was redistributed back to the people digging the cobalt out of the ground, everything would be very different. They would easily earn enough to eat food, keep children in school, buy clothes, buy medicine, and live a more decent and dignified life. That it would radically alter conditions on the bottom. If even 0.1% of the commercial grade value on the London Metal Exchange of cobalt was redistributed back to the people who were digging it out of the ground.
I mean, with the payment of with an income of $1 or $2 a day, how does the living condition of the people of Congo look like?
They live in a straw hut. Maybe it's brick. When you drive around in that part of the Congo, you see a lot of fires in the forests, and people are baking bricks, to build a stronger home. Because of course, in Africa, there's rainy season, hot season, and if you have a mud hut or a straw hut, every rainy season you've got to build it again. So brick is more durable, of course. That said, many people live in thatched huts and mud huts, and when the rainy season comes, they just cover their home in plastic tarp to try to keep the home from disintegrating. So people live in dirt floor, thatched and mud huts. As I said, maybe brick home if they're lucky, meaning a little brick square. No electricity. Electrification rate in the mining provinces of the Congo is, in the rural areas, is less than 1%. So imagine now, this is home to one of the most crucial battery component, rechargeable energy component metals in the world, and the people living there don't have electricity. Okay, so less than 1% electrification rate in rural areas. Forget about sanitation, running water. There's hardly any schools. hardly any public health clinics. It's like going back to the 19th century in certain parts of the mining provinces. I mean, the towns are different. Lubumbashi, Kolwezi, these are big cities, especially Lubumbashi has probably 1.5 million people at least living in it. When you get into the rural areas where the cobalt is and where it's being dug, people are living as if it's the 1900s, without electricity, sanitation, running water, schools, hospitals, um, any of it. And it's a very grim existence for people who live at the bottom of the rechargeable energy supply chain.
And given the amount that the government is collecting from mining companies in terms of tax and royalties, you'd expect them to at least be able to, well, offer free education, right? Or at least basic health care. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, you're right. And this is a problem. Poor governance is part of the problem. The Congolese government, uh, the Congolese government uh, uh, enjoys significant revenues from mining taxes and royalty payments. I mean, billions and billions of dollars, okay, are paid by foreign mining companies. Now, they're always cheated, meaning mining companies always underestimate how much they've dug out of the ground. They're always playing games and cheating the Congolese government because they know the Congolese government does not have the capacity or ability to audit and monitor everything. So they're always being cheated, but they're still generating billions of dollars in royalties and taxes from the mining sector. And as you rightly point out, you would think some of that would be redistributed back to addressing some of the things we just talked about: electrification, sanitation, building more schools, expanding public health, free education, and so on. But it doesn't. It doesn't. It ends up in the pockets of the political elite, as it always has since independence. And that's part of the problem. Now, at a certain point, the very challenging conditions being faced by Congolese people will not be repaired and fixed and addressed until there's a more transparent, democratic, functioning government with less corruption. That is a contributing factor. But there's a bit of nuance here because it's very easy from the outside to point the finger and say, listen, they're leaders of the problem. They're the corrupt people taking bribes from mining companies and looking the other way and pocketing money, and all the money just somehow disappears, and it's probably in some Swiss bank account belonging to the political elite and not the Congolese people. So aren't they exploiting their people just as bad as a tech company is? And at the surface, the answer is yes. But one level beneath that, there's an important nuance to understand, which is, number one, colonialism taught Africa that government is a system of theft. That's what government is. When Europeans came down to colonize and govern Africa, it was to enact a system of theft. It had nothing to do with governance. And so we're only talking 60 years since independence. Congo is a very new country and is still sorting out in the post-colonial period and achieving democratic. I mean, it took many countries a long time to sort out transparent democratic institutions after they gained independence. So Congo needs a little time, especially in the face of ongoing foreign influence. Number two, when you talk to Congolese people, as I have, and you talk about this issue of corruption and poor governance, which is a major, major problem, a thoughtful Congolese person will say to you, well, we tried good governance. That's what Patrice Lumumba promised us. We won our independence through blood and sweat and suffering. And he promised a transparent government and redistribution of our wealth and resources to our people. And look what happened to him. Within months, he was deposed, chopped to pieces, assassinated, and replaced with what? A corrupt leader who would continue the game.
Mobutu.
So how does Right, exactly. So Mobutu, and then after him, Kabila one, Kabila two. The same story.
The Kabilas, yeah.
Uh, yes. So a Congolese person will say, no leader can come today and talk about keeping the mining revenues for the people of the Congo because we already know what happens to that person. Uh, Unless that person has a death wish, they're not going to come and have that as their political vision because they'll be chopped to pieces and replaced with Mobutu number two. So it's challenging. It's challenging for a leader in Congo to express this kind of bold vision without asking for a death wish. Nonetheless, I'm just pointing out that it's nuanced. It's a little more complicated than, oh, you only have bad leaders. Nonetheless, the problems will not get solved until Congo has transparent, uh, um, a more transparent government that is more accountable and democratic and equitable for its own people. It has to achieve that at some point.
So the question of Congo is when would, I mean, how can they get good leadership? Is that the question that we should be asking?
Yes, how do we? And I think that goes for across the continent. For every one Nkrumah or Mandela, there were 10 Mobutus and Mugabes. And there's a reason for that. It comes back to the neo-colonial influence. That was a factor. But at a certain point, that reason won't work anymore. At a certain point, Congo has to stand on its own 2 feet as a free, democratic, transparent country with good governance. And the question is, how does it get there? And I think diminishing foreign influence in their internal affairs is the only way. Now, I realize my answer is also the reason for the problem. So it's easy to say diminish foreign influence to achieve good governance when the reality of poor governance is a direct result of foreign influence, or foreign influence is a big factor in it. Nonetheless, it will take new bold leadership and courage, and someone may pay a price. And where I came from, my ancestor Gandhi he paid the price. He paid the ultimate price. Lumumba paid the ultimate price, and other leaders had paid the ultimate price, but they were part of a process of achieving it. Now, Congo has been stuck in the mud since Lumumba was dispatched, and new leaders. In this last election, I was looking at it and I saw who was running. And it was a foregone conclusion that Tshisekedi would win. He has the backing of the U.S. government. He's entrenched, and certainly he's at least said good things about cleaning up the mining sector and improving transparency. It's not amounted to too much on the ground, but he's at least having the conversation. But I looked at who was running, and there were one or two people, including the Nobel laureate, who I thought, now, wow. I had this dream. I thought, what if he won? How would Congo play out? When you achieve Nobel Peace Prize status and have devoted your life to human rights and improving the condition of your people, I thought, now he's the inheritor of Lumumba's vision. He's not going to win, but that's the kind of figure Congo needs. And that's the kind of leader Congo needs. Now, how do we get there? It will be up to the Congolese people to agitate, for civil society to grow in strength, for people to stand up and try and push towards achieving that kind of leadership. And it's easy for me to say it sitting here, but that's the only way forward for Congo to break this cycle of multi-generational suffering and pillage.
Yeah, and for the people listening, the person you're speaking of is Denis Mukwege.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, I forgot to mention his name. Yes, Dr. Mukwege. I think when I saw him enter the race, I thought, how do we get this done? And I started talking to some of my Congolese friends. Is there a chance? how can we, because the opposition was all fractured. There were 8, 9, 10 of them. Is there any way we can get all of them behind him? And can we, obviously that was not meant to be this time around, but someone like him, maybe in the next election, he's young enough. If we start planning now, that kind of leader potentially could really transform things.
And if you think about it, we might need to sacrifice more Lumumbas before the Congolese people are able to enjoy their resources. Because if you take a look at it, it's like every single, well, some of the most important raw materials needed by the world are found in your country. And so when you tell everyone, hey, it's time to get out so I can benefit from my resources, I mean, you can imagine how hard and difficult that must be.
Yeah, that's right. It's not going to be, not at this stage. There's so much foreign influence, so much foreign money, especially China right now in Congo. Um, it will come at a price. Congo's not free yet. It achieved its freedom in 1960, but it's never been a free country. And that freedom, you look at other countries in Africa that are starting to really thrive. Kenya, and I was in Ghana a few months ago, and just such a different level of stability and security. There are, of course, very, very poor people in Ghana, but everywhere I went, there was another school. And I thought, it was just replaying in my mind, driving around in Congo. I couldn't find any schools, or if I did, it was just an empty little brick building. And everywhere I went in Ghana, there were schools, there were medical clinics. It's a stable country. You feel safe walking around. Um, of course, it's poor. Of course, there's all of the other things. I mean, there's corruption everywhere. But there are countries in Africa that have turned the corner and started to achieve what the word freedom really means. Congo has yet to enjoy really one day of genuine freedom since gaining independence, and that's the conversation that really needs to happen very seriously. Is how do we find the path forward with the leadership that can help this country become free and more prosperous?
And I think the sooner we can answer the question of Congo, the better we can answer the question of the whole of Africa, really.
Absolutely, absolutely, because it's the same problem in so many other countries. I mean, uh, most of Africa is post 1960 independence. I mean, this is very recent. If you think of what came before for centuries, since the time Europeans first hopped on ships and came south, you don't recover from that kind of multi-century enslavement and pillage in 2 generations, especially, and I keep saying it, but if the foreign interference continues, now Europeans they're still pillaging the place and then selling weapons and instigating strife and internal conflict. I mean, that was the British Empire model, right? Well, there's an empire over there, there's a territory over there. They've got a lot of labor, a lot of people who can work, and a lot of resources. They're technically actually more populous and powerful than us. So let's weaken them from the inside. We'll sell one of them some gunpowder. We'll sell the other one something else. We'll instigate conflict. We'll sign treaties with everyone, but then back out of it and lead to strife. Let them weaken each other and then swoop in with a few cannons. And so that's sort of the model, right? And so you still see this internal weakening of Africa today. And I've been fascinated to see how some of these coups in the Sahel and the western part of the continent have played out in the last few years and what's beneath it. And you see a very strong anti-colonial voice here. I don't think these violent coups are helpful in achieving stability for the people in those regions. But there's always a very violent anti-colonial rhetoric. Maybe it's being used as an excuse. I don't know, but it's there. It's there. And I think, yes, solving this riddle in Congo will help solve it in other parts of the continent. I mean, Africa is growing. It is blessed with resources. It has a young population. It has aspirations, as it should, for stability and prosperity. The primary obstacle now is the foreign influence and poor governance. And if those problems can be solved, then the next century could look very bright for Africa.
I just want to be sure that people really understand the atrocities the people of Congo are suffering. So, do you mind sharing the most horrific thing you witnessed in the Congo?
Congo is an open wound. It is a place of so much pain, uh, and it's a vast country, so the pain is different in different regions. I mean, Eastern Congo, as people see in the news, has been mired in violence and suffering since the Rwandan genocide. We're going all the way back to the mid 90s, and it's been one long train of misery and violence in Eastern Congo. I haven't spent much time there, so I know what's happening there. I have colleagues who have spent time there and describe it, and it's a horror. But I can't speak to it personally. The part of Congo I've spent my time in is that Katanga region between Lubumbashi and Kolwezi, where the cobalt is, where almost all the world's cobalt is, and it's hard to pinpoint what is the most horrible, awful thing in such a sea of pain, and so much torment. But I think the most devastating encounters are with parents whose children were buried alive in a tunnel collapse. And so let me describe. When we talk about people who earn $1 or $2 a day digging in these 5 and 10 meter pits and trenches, the family that I described earlier, they're paid as a function of the grade of cobalt times kilograms. These buyers and trading houses, they all have little price sheets. And it's a certain amount of money per kilogram based on the grade, 0.2%, 0.5%, 1% grade of cobalt. Think of it like purity. And if you want to earn more, you need a little higher grade. You can only dig so many kilograms in a day, but if you can get a higher grade, you can earn a little more. So the higher grade is a little deeper, maybe 30, 40, 50 meters underground. Instead of 1% grade, it could be 2, 3, 4% grade. And so now your income is going to double and triple. Instead of $1 or $2, it's going to be $5, $6. And that's an enormous difference. Imagine if suddenly you earn triple your income. So people take that risk, and they'll dig a tunnel by hand, straight down, 30, 40 meters. These are hand-dug tunnels that don't have rock bolts, ventilation shafts, any supports. And there are thousands of them around Congo because people are trying to earn a few dollars more in a day. And it's usually men and teenage boys because it requires quite a bit of strength. So children will be down there, 12, 13, 14-year-olds with their fathers, crouched in darkness for 24 hours, hacking at a vein of heterogenite in the tunnel wall. They can't sit upright, breathing particulate matter. And every week, I'm sure of it, a tunnel collapses. And everyone who's down there is buried alive instantly. And parents who have recounted the day they found out that their husband or their 14-year-old son had been buried alive. And there were some younger ones I met too. The pain on their faces, those were the most devastating, to imagine, because you can see a mother reliving that torment every day, imagining what her child's final moments were like when the crush of rock and dirt fell and the air was running out. And that child was crying out for his mother in their last breath. And for the mother to imagine what their child's panic and misery and suffering was like in those final moments, to die in that way. For what? For a few dollars? That's what we've done to these people? And we've done it to them. Those were the most devastating encounters because I can't fathom. I mean, for anyone listening who has a child, just stop, close your eyes, imagine that experience, and it will wreck you. It wrecked me every time I heard it.
And I think it's a sad reality, but if you're using a smartphone, if you're using a laptop, an electric vehicle, you're contributing to the suffering of the Congolese people.
Yeah, and this is an important point for us to end on, I think, because we have all been made unwitting participants in an invasion of the human rights of the Congolese people and the destruction of their environment. When you bought your smartphone, or I bought mine, or my tablet or laptop, or if you buy an electric vehicle, we didn't think to ourselves, okay, today when I plug in my phone, a few Congolese children are going to die. But that relationship with Congo has been forced on us against our will by a tech company that didn't think the Congolese people were worth the effort to make sure that they are working and living in decent conditions as they dig their cobalt out of the ground. And they've hidden that truth from us. They've not seen fit to get on the ground and ensure that their cobalt is being dug in decent and dignified conditions. They simply let their marketing teams declare that it's been the cobalt is being excavated in decent and dignified conditions without actually doing it. So that relationship with Congo has been forced on us. I think we should be angry about that. I think we should be upset about that. And I think we all have to take time and think about our personal consumption habits. Just because a phone company tells you upgrade your phone every year because the camera is better and the batteries last longer thanks to cobalt, doesn't mean you need to. Because every time we consume, upgrade, and buy rechargeable things, we are contributing to the demand side fever that has unleashed this violent scramble on the people of the Congo. So maybe keep using that phone until it really stops working. Maybe use your laptop as long as it works. And think about all of us, our personal consumption habits in light of the fact that this relationship with Congo, this toxic relationship, has been forced on us. And until the people in the Congo say it's better, it's not better. Tech company might say it's better, but until the people in the Congo say it's better, nothing's changed. And that's why it's important for truth seekers to keep going to Congo, getting on the ground, documenting voices, documenting ground truth, to disabuse all the fictions that are told. Don't worry, everything's fine. Look the other way. Please upgrade your gadget.
On closing remarks, what do you think the next revolution is gonna be on? And would Congo be at the center of that revolution?
This is the Congo's curse, and no one can predict what is the next treasure that the world economy is going to want and need. And invariably, it's going to be found somewhere in the global south, quite possibly in the heart of Africa. People are already talking about different battery chemistries and saying, okay, fine, you caught us on cobalt. We'll use something else. Now, at first instance, that's a complete colonial mentality. You caught my hand in the cookie jar. I'll take it out and go get it, put my hand in a different cookie jar. But I'm going to leave behind this apocalypse here. You can't go to Congo, violently pirate all of its cobalt, and then when you're caught out, say, okay, I'll go use something else, but I'll leave behind that apocalypse. That's colonialism. That's complete pure colonialism. You have to fix and repair the damage that was done. So people are already talking about maybe a different battery chemistry. Let's focus on lithium iron phosphate, so no cobalt needed. Well, Congo happens to have the third largest, maybe fourth largest lithium reserves, and already several new lithium mines are being opened in Congo. So it's just trading in one pillage for one treasure and moving 15 kilometers north where the other treasure is, and they're doing the same thing all over again. So no, it means fixing the violent, inhuman relationship, not just saying, we'll swap out one treasure for another.
I really appreciate the work that you've done. And obviously, you have risked your life too, because it seems like, the big players don't want the stories to get out there and people to understand what really is going on in the Congo. And at least I think your book partly plays a role in helping people really understand what is going on in Congo. And so when they hear that the blood of Congo is powering your life, they really understand what that means.
I hope so. I hope Cobalt Red has helped to play a small part in bringing the voices of the Congolese people to the world, in bringing the truth from the ground out into the world, and that will be a part of the process of achieving some social change and justice inside Congo.
Well, thank you very much for taking your time and doing this. And I think I'll also advise people, I haven't tried it myself, but I'll also advise people to go and also read Heart of Darkness after they read your book.
Yes, then you get the beginning of this story. This is just the latest chapter in a long story of foreign pillage of Congo.
Yeah, and the suffering of the Congolese people.